The great coronavirus oil shock for the world and Arabs. Saudi Arabia Arabian Plate oil and gas is so rich and prolific. The factors for such richness include the presence of so many petroleum systems over geological time, including repeated and extensive source rock beds, excellent carbonate in good position, and a long history of sedimentation. Saudi Arabian oil was first discovered by the Americans in commercial quantities at the Dammam oil well in 1938 and is now what known as the modern-day Dharan. Before the discovery of the oil, on January 15, 1902, Ibn Saud took Riyadh from the Rashid tribe. In 1913, his forces captured the province of Al-Hassar from the Ottoman Turks. In 1922, he completed his conquest of the Najd, and in 1925, he conquered Hijaz. In 1932, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was proclaimed with Ibn Saud as king. Without stability in the region, the search for oil would have been difficult, as evidenced by the early oil exploration in neighboring countries such as Yemen and Oman. Prior to 1938, there were three main factors that triggered the search for oil in Arabia. The number one factor, the discovery of oil by the Anglo-Persian Oil Company at Masjid al-Salaman mountain of northwestern Persia in 1908. But the consensus of the geological opinion at the time was that there was no oil on the Arabian Peninsula, although there were rumors of an oil seepage at Qatif on the eastern seabed of Al-Asa, the eastern province of Arabia. The second factor, the demand for oil during World War I. It became obvious that oil was going to be a crucial resource in warfare for the foreseeable future. Examples that provide this was General Galliani, commanding of the Paris taxi fleet to ferry soldiers to the front. This happened when the city seemed about to fall. In addition to this, Germany's shortage of oil supplies hindered their ability to produce aircraft, automobiles, and engines. The Allies took advantage of this by producing thousands of vehicles to aid their war effort. The third factor was the onset of the Great Depression. Prior to the Depression, a major source of income for the ruler of Hijaz were the taxes paid by the pilgrims on the way to the holy cities. After the Depression hit, the number of the pilgrims per year fell from 100,000 to below 40,000. This hurt the economy badly, and they needed to find alternative sources of income. This caused Ibn Saud to get serious about the search for oil. Initial search for oil started in 1922. Ibn Saud met New Zealand mining engineer named Major Frank Holmes. During World War I, Holmes had been to Gallipoli and then Ethiopia, where he first heard rumors of the oil seeps of the Persian Gulf region. He was convinced that much oil would be found throughout the region. After the war, Holmes helped to set up Eastern and General Syndicate Limited in order, among other things, to seek oil concession in the region. In 1923, the king signed a concession with Holmes, following him to search for oil in eastern Saudi Arabia. Eastern and the General Syndicate brought in a Swiss geologist to evaluate the land, but he claimed that the searching for oil in Arabia would be a purge gamble. This discouraged the major banks and oil companies from investing in Arabia oil ventures. In 1925, Holmes signed a concession with Sheikh of Bahrain, following him to search for oil there. He then proceeded to the United States to find an oil company that might be interested in taking on the concession. He found help from Gulf Oil. In 1927, Gulf Oil took control of the concession that Holmes made years ago, but Gulf Oil was a partner with the Iraq Petroleum Company, which was jointly owned by Royal Dutch, Shell, Anglo-Persian, the Campagne Française de Pétroles, and the Near East Development Company, representing the interests of the Americas Company. The partners had signed up to the Red Line Agreement, which meant that Gulf Oil was precluded from taking up the Bahrain concession without the consent of other partners, and they declined. Despite a promising survey in Bahrain, Gulf Oil was forced to transfer its interest to another company, Standard Oil of California, SOCAL, which was not bound by the Red Line Agreement. The discovery of oil came when the SOCAL company set up a subsidiary company, the California Arabian Standard Oil Company, CASOC, to develop the oil concession. SOCAL also joined forces with the Texas Oil Company when together they formed Caltex in 1936 to take advantage of the later formidable marketing network in Africa and Asia. When CASOC geologists surveyed the concession area, they identified a promising site and named it the Dammam No. 7 of the nearby village. Over the next 3 years, the drillers were unsuccessful in making a commercial strike, but Chief Geologist Max Steenig persevered. He urged the team to drill deeper, even when the Mam No. 7 was plagued by caves in, stuck drill bits and other problems before the drillers finally struck oil on 3rd of March 1938. This discovery would turn out to be the first of many, eventually revealing the largest source of crude oil in the world. For the king, oil revenues became a crucial source of wealth since he no longer had to rely on receipts from pilgrims to Mecca. This discovery would alter Middle Eastern political relations forever. For all the current affair news, subscribe News 786, like and share. Saudi Arabia-United States relations refers to the bilateral relations between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United States of America, which began in 1933 when the full diplomatic relations were established and became formalized in 1951 Mutual Defense Assistance Agreement. Despite the differences between the two countries, the ultra-conservative Islamic absolute monarchy and a secular constitutional republic, the two countries have been allies. Former President George W. Bush and Barack Obama have close and strong relations with senior members of the Saudi royal family. The two countries have been in disagreement with regard to the state of Israel as well as the embargo of the US and its allies by Saudi Arabia and other Middle East oil exports during 1973 oil crisis, which raised oil prices considerably. The 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq, which Saudi Arabia opposed, aspects of war on terror, and what many in the see as the pernicious influence of Saudi Arabia after the September 11 attacks. What triggered the inversion of the prices in April 20 was the overflow of unsellable oil in the tank farms of Cushing, Oklahoma, where US oil futures are settled, but the collapse in oil prices has set shockwave ripples around the world. People in the West tend to think about oil shocks from the perspective of the consumer. They notice when prices go up. The price spikes in 1973 and 1979, triggered by boycott by oil procedures, are etched in the collective consciousness as price controls left American lining up for gas and European governments imposed weekend driving bans. This was more than an economic shock. The balance of power in the world economy seemed to be shifting from developed to developing world. The same thing happened more gradually in the early 2000s when the oil prices surged and remained at elevated levels until 2014. Once again, consumer was squeezed, and not only in the West, the poorest developing countries were particularly hard hit. The flip side of this was the enormous wealth accumulated by the oil producers. Emerging market fossil fuel companies such as Brazil's Petrobras and the Malaysia's Petronas were lionized in global financial markets. Backed by the power of Gazprom, Lukoil, and Rosneft, Vladimir Putin, Russia's remade as a geopolitical force. We are now facing a fourth countershock, faced with the unprecedented collapse in demand to the COVID-19. Talks about Russia and Saudi Arabia broke down in early March. Russia refused to limit production, and Saudi Arabia doubled down by dumping oil on global market at steep discounts. Despite the effort to patch together an agreement on production restriction in recent weeks, the overhang of the supply is massive. A fleet of up to 20 market tankers loaded with Saudi oil is bearing down on America oil port. Even if the negative prices for oil in May were the result of the technical factors in the future market, the prices for June are also historic lows.